When I started with this, all of this, like, I was like, look at the blog turned into a CMS. This is amazing, right? And then you would have just seen like the PHP.
Now with the site editor, you can install like the 2024 theme across an entire network, and every single site could look completely different based on the controls that you give those users.
Like we were built completely on AWS where it was before, and our AWS bills in August and January were significantly higher than our AWS bills in the other months. And that was just a fact of life. And also, you have to be careful on pushing updates and making any changes during those times.
Welcome to Impressive Hosting, where we seek to uncover the core tenets of great WordPress hosting. I'm your host, Jesse Friedman, and with me today are Jim Groom from Reclaim Hosting and Ronnie Burt from Gravatar at Automattic. Jim, could you give us a little bit of an intro, help us understand what you've been working on, where you've been, what keeps you interested?
So I am actually a majority partner, I guess you'd say, at Reclaim Hosting. We're a small, higher ed focused web hosting company, and we're a distributed company. And before that, I worked for about 20 years in higher ed, both as a professor and as an instructional technologist.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Ronnie, why don't you jump in? Help us understand a little bit about what you've been working on lately.
Sure. I, similar to Jim, was an educator, both secondary and at the higher ed level for a while. And then I spent about 12 years working on getting WordPress into higher ed institutions. And the last 3 years, I've worked at Automattic on Sensei LMS, our learning management plugin, and working on Gravatar, and also some of our education commitments to still trying to get more and more students and universities to use WordPress.
We must have lived parallel lives, Ronnie, I think.
We have. I think we've met once or twice in the way back in the day, briefly.
I'm not surprised given what you're doing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And for those of you at home, if you haven't already been able to tell, today we're going to be discussing hosting for higher education. All right. So to jump in, Jim, you and I met at WP Campus this year. I had presented on unpacking Multisite, and you had some great insight as well. And we got to talking a little bit about WP Cloud and your hosting company and what we're both trying to do to help provide better hosting to higher education. And then I came home and I did some research and I learned about what you've been working on. And the first thing that spoke to me was a domain of one's own. And I would love to hear more about that project.
Yeah, absolutely. So a domain of one's own kind of is a play on Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own. And the idea was, and it was part of a group at the University of Mary Washington, a small liberal arts public school in Virginia, that we wanted to give faculty, students, and admin their own web hosting space so that they could install, whether it be WordPress, which most did, or Drupal, or, Scalar, Omeka, all of these PHP-based apps, or even if they go back to writing HTML or what have you, we wanted it to be a space that they controlled and that they took with them. And that this idea that this space would kind of be, a sense of identity for them, a digital identity that they took well beyond their time at Mary Washington. Now, with the rise of Instagram and some of the Facebooks, and I think a lot of my Gen Xers, I'm very kind of disappointed with their Facebook habits. But in the end, I think it's something I still very much believe in, is the idea of building and creating your personal identity online and narrating your work and narrating your reflections. And that was doing that in higher ed was a key place to do it because, that's where they were already doing that for a whole bunch of different topics. So bringing that online and doing that, oftentimes WordPress was a tool of choice because its ease of use and how robust it was pretty much what domain of one's own came. We did it at UMW, but then other schools wanted it. So that's when I rolled out of UMW and started Reclaim Hosting.
So that's what Reclaim Hosting is focused on.
Yeah, it's one of the things it does. Absolutely.
Okay. And what are the core technical components of that? So we're talking about giving students and professors an opportunity to manage a property, let's say, on the internet, have a domain, and then they can use that to share their content, speak their voice, as you said, share their narrative around what it is that they're working on. But what is that actually built on? Is that on a WordPress multi-site? Is it some other forms of technology? What other components go into
So
making that happen?
the domain of one's own is specifically built on cPanel so that we could give people their own web hosting suite. Fact is oftentimes there will be a kind of bifurcation when universities will say, do you want your own cPanel, or is that too much? Or do you want a WordPress as part of a WordPress multi-site? And so it's kind of interesting where we started with cPanel, but for certain tasks, for certain folks, cPanel's overkill, and they just want a WordPress site on WordPress multi-site. So, I think domain of one's own, while our kind of version of it, which really integrates single sign-on and cPanel, and WordPress is kind of the portal on top of it, and cPanel is embedded within the page of WordPress, it's pretty slick. The idea of domain of one's own, while as a product, it's cPanel with, people being able to build this, I think as a concept, it's much bigger than that, right? And it's not limited to what Reclaim Hosting sells. It's the idea that, people should manage their own domain and become a node on the web and keep the web weird and avoid kind of everything aggregating to just a few sites. And, you having no real history or reflection or a piece of what it is you contributed that's outside of some of those spaces that I feel like they just kind of bury it. So I don't know. I guess there's the product, and then there's the vision and the kind of the larger kind of thing that doesn't depend upon Reclaim Hosting. It just depends upon believing that, the web should be kind of, cultivated with individual sites, kind of back to the 2005, 2006 web where people blogged actually, and they wrote about stuff and they commented, and there was this idea of RSS, and you could create these beautiful syndication hubs. I think it comes out of that. And there's a kind of like a hippie driving around in the bus, still believing that this can happen, man. The revolution's here, man. And I don't know, I don't know, the hippies on campus, I guess, in some ways, but I still think, like I said early on, I still think it's relevant. I still think a lot of this stuff is key to people understanding how the web works. Anyway, I'll stop there.
It's a great point. I actually spoke or taught at a university for 2 universities for seven years. And while I was teaching web design, multimedia, things like that, I had advocated internally at the universities on more than one occasion for students to be able to have their own property, their own carve out their own ownership of the web. Not just because it's an important skill to have, but also because when you have control over, as you mentioned before, control over an open source piece of technology that allows you to express yourself, that is relevant to anybody in any educational field. So whether they're learning to become a lawyer or a doctor or web designer or whatever it might be, being able to understand how the web operates and how to express yourself, I think, is incredibly important.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Yeah. So Ronnie, you've worked on multi-site in higher ed for a long time. Why do you think hosting companies, higher education institutions tend to choose multi-site?
I think a lot of it has to do with you have a shared database and a multi-site installation, and that shared database makes a lot of things easier. Some things harder, but some things easier. And some of those things that are easier include authentication, user management, and just the tie-in to like the single sign-on solutions that the higher ed institution's using. And also if there's some sort of branding guidelines, having a shared theme or a shared set of themes, that also is easier in a multi-site. I'm actually curious, Jim, what you're seeing. I'm still a huge advocate of multi-site, and I think there's still a good place for it to play. But are some of those strengths like different today than they were back when Multisite started and we started getting involved in Multisite? Or are there things now that you can do other ways with single sites? I mean, are you experiencing that or seeing that with the folks you work with?
I have to say that I'm pretty, like, I don't have like, oh, you should do domain of one's own in multi-site. Like, I started on multi-site. Like, UMW Blogs was an early platform that the group I was with helped create. And I love that. We have 15,000 sites. It's scaled beautifully. It provided a network where, like you said, we could change themes and plugins all in one place. It was one site to upgrade, not, 9,000 sites to upgrade. Like, it had so many benefits. But I think one of the things our group started thinking about was, are we limiting ourselves by doing, here's just one tool? What does it mean to give people a bigger sense of literacy, like learning about DNS, learning about domains, learning about databases? So I think in some ways it was kind of a pedagogical sensibility, but not necessarily because WordPress Multisite sucks. In fact, WordPress Multisite was the thing that made it possible. It's the thing that made everybody so kind of compelled by the idea of having a digital presence. And I think, think about it. Like, you were on a WordPress Multisite and then you got really excited. What's the next thing you would do? Maybe take it out of that WordPress Multisite and get your own hosting and explore further, right? Like, you would build sites, you would create a kind of WordPress enabled app. Like, you'd go to the next level because you were hooked. And I think we had enough people at our university hooked that they wanted more. University, faculty, and students alike. And I think that was it was not an evolution, because it suggests that WordPress Multisite is somehow a devolution, right? It's not. But it allowed it provided our offerings to be that much richer as a group. And I think that really is the idea. It's like we were providing more than we were before. And I stand by WordPress Multisite. It's great. We have some of the biggest WordPress multi-sites out there that we support and host. And, that database can be a real son of a gun, I'll tell you, if it's not sharded or dealing with something. But I don't. I wouldn't privilege one over the other, frankly. I think they work best together, if you will.
Yeah, I think that multi-site opens the door for you to have a lot more control. I mean, you mentioned that before, right? So I think for people at home who aren't familiar with multi-site is a way in which WordPress can operate as a network of sites that uses the same core files at the core level. It allows for you to upload themes and plugins and manage those across the entire network of sites in one hit. So when you're updating one plugin, you're updating it across that entire network. It gives you the ability to have user roles and then a new role called super admin, which gives you more control over the entire network. But there are some challenges with multi-site as well. As you said, you get a huge database. A lot of times with multi-site, this isn't inherent to a problem with multi-site, but I think that because of the fact that we end up using multi-site to handle thousands of sites, you get a lot of concurrent admin users, which can be painful and hard to compensate for from a performance perspective. Jim, I would love to hear a little bit more about that. How do you approach that? If someone comes to you looking to build a multi-site that could grow, maybe they're building a site for every student they have, for every professor they have, every department inside the education or inside the university. You can end up with thousands of sites in a period of years. How do you go about approaching that so that you're building something, small in the beginning that needs to be able to grow to thousands of sites?
That's a really good question. It's something we were challenged with early on because we took on, the Virginia Commonwealth University had a instance called Rampages, which was run by Tom Woodward and his team and Gardner Campbell and their team at VCU. And it had 35,000 sites. And for a university site, that's a big WordPress multi-site. And at the time, it was hosted on WordPress Engine. And I think WordPress Engine was like, we don't want this anymore. And so Little Reclaim Hosting was like, okay, let's figure out how to do this. And so what we did is we moved that over and we had, we host our instances, some of them on DigitalOcean, Some of them are in our own cloud called Reclaim Cloud. And I think, what we figured out is, we could shard that database, which we did, which sometimes is not recommended, sometimes is. But I think by sharding the database and by actually I think that the infrastructure in general has gotten so much stronger than it was in 2008 or 9 when we were doing it, that the servers are faster. They can manage these databases better. We're backing up nightly. We're taking images so that if something disastrous happens, we can kind of recover. But by and large, a big server, BP server, which you'd need for that, can handle that quite well. And so we started to get into, when we're doing .edus or mission critical sites, which most of ours are not, to be clear. I mean, maybe during finals, but it doesn't have often the same, be up or die like an LMS, so that we don't have failover for all our sites, our cPanel sites, but for certain ones we do. And that's a multi-region setup that sounds very similar to some of the stuff you said you were doing with Bluehost. I mean, for the WordPress hosting. And I love that stuff because we're doing load balanced, multi-region, one in the West Coast, one in the East Coast through Cloudflare. And that just gets to my technical stuff. I really dig and we're doing a very big multi-site right now. That's wildcard DNS. And we're doing that as a multi-region. And that's got a 200 gigabyte database. So it's right? You're going into the fire. So I guess, I don't think we were in the same situation that I was in 2008, 2009, when UMW blogs would go down regularly. It was hosted on Bluehost, and it was $75 Bluehost account that I was running 9,000 sites on. And Bluehost must have been what a jerk. Get your stuff onto a managed host, right? They were probably what are you thinking? And I was an arrogant, educator, $5, keep my site up, right? And they were probably bye-bye. So I don't know. I mean, I think that the infrastructure is strong enough. I mean, people doing it on AWS, we're doing it on DigitalOcean. We have a cloud where we can do it on multiple instances in multiple regions. It's gotten so much more sophisticated. These Galera clusters where you can do the databases in different places if something goes down. So it's a brave new world. I can't pretend to be either a full-blown coder or a full-blown infrastructure person. I have better people around me, but I love the idea of it. And that's why I got into WordPress Multisite, is I love the tinkering around it and the idea that you could kind of imagine this space. And let's think about it. Ground Zero, 2008, I could provide multiple thousands of sites for a campus on an enterprise level software for $75 a month. It was crazy. Think about how insane that would be when you think about what they're playing Backboard or even Canvas or whatever, these learning management systems. I loved that because it was really guerrilla ed tech. It was DIY ed tech that we could provide to an entire school for very affordable, and really gave them, I think, a tool where they could actually, like you said early on, Jesse, they were learning skills of the web, skills that would transfer brilliantly out into the world when 40% of the web now is kind of controlled by WordPress, or WordPress is kind of what undergirds it. That's interesting stuff for me, right? I don't, yeah. So anyway,
sure.
I'll stop.
You just reminded me of 2020. We were hosting lots of multi-site networks for universities, and the world shut down and the universities went remote, and so many turned to these existing multi-site setups because it was push a button and they needed to create new dashboard sites to share statistics, new emergency sites to share new protocols and all these things. And they were able to do that within, minutes. They had a branded theme, and they didn't have time to go through the normal bureaucracy that most universities have in place for new sites and things. And that was just a great example use case. And I'm just thinking of all the use cases, and that's what was so unique about what you're doing and WordPress use in higher ed is no two instances, no two implementations are the same, right? They all kind of have their own little nuance, or you have portfolios for students. And I'm just curious, like, if you have any, put you on the spot, but like any cool like use cases that you've seen recently that kind of like re-excites you that universities are using with their WordPress sites.
It's kind of, I mean, as you know, both of you know, because you live WordPress more than me even, it's like WordPress has now become, when I started with this, all of this, like, I was like, look at the blog turned into a CMS. This is amazing, right? And then you would have just seen like the PHP, and you could create pages that stayed in the theme, and it was just seemed remarkable. Like, hey, this is not a blog software, it's a CMS. But now, like, you're talking about full-blown apps. You're talking about WordPress running entire, like, we run .edus that are all WordPress and using Multisite to create departmental sites. Like, and there's some really sophisticated examples. Like, because I'm doing the multi-region stuff now, because I'm kind of where I am now, like, I'm digging like folks at like Macalester College or Trinity College who are actually using a WordPress multi-site to, you know, create their departmental sites, to create not only their main site, but like they're using multi-site. How I kind of think it should have been used is like WordPress is, you know, not only the top thing, but you can create all these independent, you know, departmental sites, club sites, student sites, and it becomes a network. And the idea that Garner Campbell said, who I used to work with at Mary Washington, and I loved it, is like, it became a reflection of the life of the mind, right? Like the actual domain and the like existence of all these sites and all the information there, hopefully not just marketing, but some of it reflection and about the actual experience of learning and teaching, becomes this kind of, you know, I don't know, reflection of a moment of the school as a kind of living, breathing experiment. And I just, for me, that was always the kind of vision of WordPress I had when I was doing this stuff. Like, it became an extension of what was happening at an institution. And by extension, it became an example of all that is good in that institution, or maybe even all that's bad. But I don't know. I'm not really answering your question.
Jim, you have this like romantic view of it. And I absolutely love that, because I think back to the mid 90s to late 90s when I got started building out anything out on the web. And it was such a wonderful time, because there was so much experimenting to be done. So much new stuff was coming out all the time. You could really try some really fun things, and then responsive web design, and then CMSs and everything else. And it's like a beautiful thing, because you think back to the old days of the internet and how there was so much opportunity to explore new things and try new things, experiment. And I feel like maybe we've lost a little bit of that in the recent years with social media, and folks are putting a ton of great content on YouTube and TikTok and things like that. But those walled gardens create this, I don't know. It's like the medium is exactly the same. It's always this exact same type of video, or this exact same type of content or photograph. And the content itself can be something amazing, but the actual, the way in which you consume it is all through the same exact apps, and everything is exactly the same. And there isn't that like unique way to kind of really dive into exploring the web itself. And so there's benefits to that. You're more focused on the content, but I think what happens now is we are circling back to the opportunity where you can really get into editing the way in which your website is delivering this content, and have it speak more to the way in which you want to express yourself. When we got started with Multisite, as you said, like back in like 2008, I started working on it in like 2010, and I was managing a few thousand sites, and we had probably like 10 themes that you could use across these 1,000 sites. And they put up these very specific guardrails, right? It made it very easy to control, because all they could do is edit this very small content area or change a menu or whatever it might be. But for the most part, the exact same design of the site was the same. Now with the site editor, you can install like the 2024 theme across an entire network, and every single site could look completely different based on the controls that you give those users. So I love that idea of going back and trying to like give students or professors an opportunity to really express themselves through a website more than just the content itself that they can put out on the web.
Can I make
Um,
I
yeah,
just
go
want
for
to
it.
make
Jump in.
I don't know how do I say how this, I can't use my words right now, but I want to make a confession. My confession is I'm still like a classic editor guy. Like, cause I'm old. Like, I'll be honest with you. I'm old. Like, and I never, I understand how the site editor works. I understand Gutenberg and the block editor, but like part of my idea here, when I was in higher ed, and I don't know if you felt the same, is the simplicity was key. You go into a WordPress now and like, it's great if you're a developer, right? Because you start to say, I'm going to deal with the loop. I'm going to deal with CSS. I'm going to deal with this, that. And it's like most students, faculty are like, oh, like this is a little bit
Sure.
like too much. I'm not. And I think it's a great tool for teaching web development. It's a great tool for teaching like PHP design or web design or JavaScript. But I struggle with the simplicity of like, what sells a class when you go in and you say, hey, 30 people, you're going to be using this to reflect on your history exam or your history course and your kind of say like your final thesis. That's a very different kind of sell than you can start from scratch and create whatever you want, because to create from whatever you want, oftentimes with people who you're selling for the first time, is a brick wall. And they're just like, nope, 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 nope. Don't give me whatever I want. Tell me exactly what to do. So
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of it, though. I think so. The way I look at it is that the guardrails that we put up, the ability to allow someone to write content into a like what is like the classic editor or an old form field, basically allows you to enter in that content and then it's off and running. I think that's really powerful for students and professors and folks who just need to share information, as you said, about like, a history class or whatever it might be. But the really cool thing about the editor and the Gutenberg blocks is that it takes really complex technology and makes it a lot more simple. So yes, if you go into writing custom queries and doing a lot of complex stuff like that, of course, that's gonna be a little bit more difficult. And I think it'll also probably incite a few people to explore more there. Maybe they were just planning on blogging, but now they can learn a whole new skill and they can build a website. But there are things that are unbelievably hard to do on any website solution that are so much easier now. Like a great example is the cover block. You don't need any development skills to be able to use the cover block, right? It automatically gives you the ability to do dynamic scrolling, to have content over an image, things like that are typically a little bit harder to do in the classic editor. So I think there is a good balance to strike there. I think what we run into is that a lot of folks are, anytime that you run into a blank canvas, which Gutenberg and the site editor is in a sense, you run into a decision problem where you don't really know where to start. You don't know how to get things going. You have unlimited possibilities. Sometimes you know something that you like and you want to replicate that, but for the most part, you're kind of overwhelmed by the possibilities. And so you need those guardrails to be put up sometimes to help you kind of like guide you right to exactly what it is that you're hoping to accomplish. So I think there is a good balance to strike there.
And you also have, like, I hear Jim talk about hosting main EDU websites and department sites who have strict branding guidelines and
Sure.
strict design language that must be adhered to. And opening it up to the whole full site editor and everything is not going to make the branding team happy, or the design team, like, where they want a consistent look and feel. But I have seen people doing some really cool things with, you can lock down to these blocks only, or you can have presets of styles and you not let the fonts be changed and and all that. But that is a lot harder to do than it used to be fair. It takes a little bit more knowledge and overhead and pre-planning than locking it into the CSS of a theme file or something. So
great
I think
feature
that's
request for the team to
fair.
consider for sure.
Yeah. No, it's all getting better, but I can totally understand and appreciate where some people might feel like you take a few steps back to go a few steps forward later or something.
Yeah.
in the
It's
process.
interesting too. I mean, like WordPress in general, right? Like open source tools. Like when you think about it, like the Hello World, it came with that, and it's still like, you still kind of come to that to this day. But the tool itself has, from the time I was first proselytizing for it in higher ed in 2008 till now, it's basically a different tool. And it has a robust set of possibilities, but also it's not just a niche open source tool anymore. It is, serving, millions and millions of people. So obviously it's going to have, different demands. And what I need it to do in a higher ed organization is not the same as whatever. But maybe this goes back to a good point, Ronnie, that I never answered your question. I'm going to try to, like, good examples. Like there are some people who I work with, on the web, like Alan Levine and Martha Burtis and some other folks. And and Tom Woodward, and they started creating these tools, which they called SPLOTs, which is a terrible acronym. Smallest possible learning online tool. I don't know if that's what it means. They don't even know what it means. But
I think it's better than yet another online learning tool.
So these SPLOTs are interesting in that you'll go to a page on a WordPress site and it will have all of the forms and pieces for you to fill out. You want to upload an image and give you the information. Like it basically is creating a very simple interface for the course experience. And I love that because you can do that in WordPress as an open source tool and develop that. And they'll integrate like Gravity Forms and they'll do some sophisticated stuff. Another great example of this is we built a class called DS106, which is an open online class that kind of dealt with, digital storytelling. But Martha Burtis went on and built basically a kind of assignment bank using forms and tags and categories. And basically you would submit an assignment and then other people would see it and they could decide if they would do it. And once they did it, they would tag it on their own site, wherever that was hosted, and it would pull into the mother blog, and then their example would be there. So you'd see the main assignment, but then you see everybody who did the assignment. And so it became a way to kind of aggregate in the course. And we did that all with duct tape and WordPress. And that's like, that for me is the joy of WordPress, right? Like just because I'm not a developer who understands the modern vision of WordPress in the same way, doesn't mean I still can't do everything I used to do in a kind of different context. And I think, that's where I try and kind of hold my horses, and everybody's got a kind of, I'm old enough, I guess, where I kind of like have seen a couple of cycles go through that. Like, I'm not like, gosh, it should be this or it should be that. It's like, no, I know the simple things I want to do and play with and experiment with. And, that's kind of a fun thing about a tool like WordPress that gives you the ability to do it. And it's done that for like almost 20 years now, or more than 20 years. So anyway, like I'm not trying to, throw shade on what WordPress can or can't do with the editor, just more kind of thinking like, that all that stuff made these kind of innovative classes that we taught DS106 possible. And it's because it was open source and accessible.
I'm going to have to check that out. Great. That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you touched on something where you had the content from the network sites go up to what you call the mother blog. So is that a common thing where you're sharing content from one site in a network to another site in a network?
I don't know. I don't want to go too long or talk too much. Ronnie, you haven't talked enough, so feel free to talk. But fine. So two things there. I don't know if you remember a guy named Dr. Mike. You remember a guy named Dr. Mike in the forums?
No.
So this guy, nutball. And so anyway, came up with this thing called a tag site for WordPress Multisite. So basically you would create, and maybe Dansha or Donica is the one who like developed the tag site. But anyway, it essentially reproduced every site on the multi-network in one blog, so that you had a kind of like, how would you say, almost an entire set of every tag in every category in one blog. So that could be one where even if you did it across the multi-network or the multi-site, you would have a tag that would link every blog post with that tag or every blog post with that category, which early on was really amazing. So we would use that to do it. The one with the assignment bank that I'm talking about is actually every student for DS-106 got their own domain and web hosting. And they would actually blog there. And then we'd use a plugin called Feed WordPress by Charles Johnson to actually pull all of their sites into the mother blog. And then it would do the same thing that the post blog did, or the tags blog did, that, Dr. Mike would talk about, and basically allowed us to have a official blog with all the posts, and now that blog has like 120,000 posts because that site had that had been such a huge course. But it basically was doing the same thing that post blog was that Dr. Mike created. And so, or Donka, I don't know who created it. It's a little bit thing. I think it was Donica. But anyway, that's my story.
And it's kind of like the good old days of Twitter, where
Yes.
you could search by a tag. People would, like you were at an event and we would all use the same hashtag, and we don't do that as much anymore. But it's similar to that, and being able to syndicate it and aggregate it in
that
one
was
site.
the key to DS-106 was syndication and aggregation and RSS, right? And WordPress really kind of it allowed for everything had an RSS tag, every category, every tag, right? And that was huge for the stuff we were doing with these syndication hubs.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that I don't know the answers to this. It's still over my head, but I'm trying to learn that the stuff that the Fediverse and these different protocols are using can make this even better for extending that
I agree.
conversation going forward.
Yeah, it's great. So one of the things that I'm thinking about on a regular basis, so over at WP Cloud, we're running a cloud platform that's built specifically for WordPress, managed WordPress hosting. It's delivering WordPress as a service because we handle all the management of everything top to bottom. But one of the things I'm thinking about is how do we help folks who might be struggling with multi-site right now, and maybe they want to think about unpacking their multi-site. So things that you get out of the box with WP Cloud that would help with this is like symlink files. You can tie GitHub to it, so you can push out a release and it'll update all the sites on your network in one hit. But the thing that you get for free with multisite that I'm thinking about is user management. And so with user management, you can define specific roles, and then that person can then be assigned to multiple blogs across that network. So you could have a student maybe is only able to access their class websites or their own specific websites. Professors, maybe they can access every website in their department, and so on and so forth. But I also know that, and I learned a lot of this at WP Campus actually, is that there are other tools out there that are managing user accounts for students and educators, and tying that directly into WordPress so that their whatever it's called, their user or their student IDs and things like that, right? They can be tied directly into that. So let me ask you this: if someone's thinking about unpacking a multi-site, is there an advantage to multi-site that you can only get with multi-site in this way in managing users, or can you replicate users across multiple sites using the same technology with these services that help with student management and all that?
It's a good question, and it's thorny. And here's why it's thorny. It's universities certainly do. They have IDPs, all this information about students and faculty and courses. But at the point where they're sharing that with us as a third-party service, things change in terms of security, in terms of questions of what do they allow for us to access? And how do they create those groups so that we can only get granular possibilities? As much as a lot of them say, that won't be a problem initially, by the time we get down to okay, can we pull in a group for a course to create a course in WordPress Multisite seamlessly? They're like, well, no. You know what I mean? You're going to have to create a plugin for that, or there's going to have to be some other way. And that's, I think, because the way in which a lot of these identity management systems work on campus, they're not I'm not saying they're not sophisticated. They're very sophisticated, but I don't think the IT, and this goes back to a question around security, they're very comfortable giving a lot that information to a third-party vendor for a variety of good reasons. So we have not had really a powerful way of doing that apart from plugins that a guy named Boone Gorgeous at CUNY had created, which did a great job of pulling in groups of students, based on, what class they were. But that's basically, we had a roster where we could pull in from a CSV. It had nothing to do with automatically it's creating. Now, people piggyback on Canvas or Moodle or the learning management system to do that. And that's different because then you're just piggybacking on what they've already shared with the learning management system. And I think IT departments are a lot more comfortable with that. And, you kind of don't have to give it to the third party in the same way. So it's a very complicated question, and it actually has a lot of complicated answers. We don't integrate often with the learning management system. So that's something that I wouldn't be able to speak so cleanly to, just to be honest with you. What API calls they make, where they do that integration, I'm not sure. So short answer to your question is we haven't had much success with that.
But I would say the success that you probably had and that I used to have was it's definitely easier in a multi-site because you're only doing it once. And so I can go to the IT department and be like, this is the one instance it needs its like public-private key pairing or whatever, where if it was, 1,000 individual sites, we're going to need separate instances, they probably each will need like some special server config to handle that authentication method or whatever. So it's definitely more feasible in a multi-site environment. And that's definitely a strength of multi-site.
One of the things I was thinking about is syncing user roles from one blog to a variety of them. So you could have one act as like a parent blog, grant access to that one with the right roles to all the students and professors and everybody else, and then create a way to sync those, maybe using SSO or something like that to sync that access across multiple sites. Might be something worth exploring.
Yeah, people have done some work, like Jim was saying, using LTI with Canvas and other things to pull class rosters. There's work there. It's just it's always a moving target, so you have to be careful what you're getting yourself into.
Two of the people I already mentioned, Boone Gorgeous, who's a developer for CUNY and just wonderful developer, great person, but also Tom Woodward, who was behind the Rampage's WordPress Multisite. He's done a lot of this kind of stuff, thinking through roles. And because a lot of times, like these were freshman seminars that would get automatically populated. So he's someone who has come up with a solution. But given I don't know the specifics, he blogs about this regularly. So I don't think it could be found on his site. But he's also probably,
maybe he'd be a good guest for the show
because he's actually done a lot of this stuff and he's thought through a lot of this stuff. So Tom Woodward, he's worked now at Middlebury College, but he does wonderful stuff and plugin development, but also thinking through these very questions for higher ed, far more in the weeds with the WordPress code than I ever was, just to be clear.
Yeah. All right, I got one more question before we wrap things up. It's November right now, and a lot of the customers that we are hosting are thinking about Black Friday and how their e-commerce websites are going to perform during that surge. Let me ask you this to both of you. What's your experience with higher education and that kind of surge? Are there times in the year when you need to be ready to compensate for an influx of traffic, a great deal of concurrent users, things like that? What are some of the things that you think about in that way?
I mean, the first week of any semester, like we were built completely on AWS where I was before. And our AWS bills in August and January were significantly higher than our AWS bills in the other months. And that was just a fact of life. And also, you have to be careful on pushing updates and making any changes during those times. You need to be very careful about when you push these things.
Ronnie, 100% on that. Like, I really feel like, if you're pushing, like we're doing server migrations, like we're trying to get off CentOS 7 for some of our cPanel sites and get onto, Alma Linux 9 or what have you. And like we had this idea that maybe we can do some of these during the semester. And schools are like, no. So like, also like when you do those migrations or when you do any work, you really have very small windows. You have, December until like whenever the semester starts. And you have a little bit longer in the summer, although the summer always gets eaten up with summer school or something else. So finding good times to do, as Ronnie pointed out, any kind of updates or migrations or stuff like that, it's tricky.
I lied. I said I had one last question, but you guys just made me think of one other thing. Is there anything to think about, special considerations for universities that aren't distributed, where you have all of your users within a certain square mile radius? They're all accessing these sites from the same areas physically. Does that matter? Does that add any complexity to it?
Yes. If you're running any sort of like DDoS protection or firewall, they'll all look like they're coming from one IP address, and you have to just figure out how to, identify that as okay traffic and let them in for sure.
Ronnie, on the nose again. Like we often have like a server, like a class, say of 300 people will all sign up. This happened at the University of Oklahoma. They all signed up for a site, and immediately the server was like, no, this IP is obviously, a bad actor. And, we had to watch our firewall and be clear. So yeah, depending upon it, you can have issues when everyone signs up at once. But that's also another issue with load, like you said, with Black Friday, right? When, WordPress, if you're trying to sign up hundreds of people at once, and the server, if it's not on a very beefy server, the performance could get rough. So that's another thing we run into. And, that thing we haven't talked about, but it's worth talking about, and I know, Jesse, you want to wrap this up, so I'll be really brief, is there's the
Bring it on.
server and the infrastructure, which is key, and I'm very interested in, and I kind of love it. But then there's the support on the ground. And I think, Ronnie, you know this probably better than anyone, like how much support you have on a campus for stuff like WordPress, Multisite, or whatever other tool you're using is going to determine how successful it is. And I think that has been true with every project I've seen. And I've seen now hundreds of them at universities. And those who have really well-funded, good teams who have a vision and kind of have a direction, those WordPress multi-sites flourish. Those who are just hanging out there and people don't know what to do with it, they're not getting support for it, those die. And I think there is that. There's the hosting, and I think, WordPress hosting, I'm sure it's great, right? Reclaim hosting, I know it's great. But like the idea that it doesn't matter at the end if they don't have people on the ground who understand that technology, can support it cleanly, like for the community, and then also have a vision of where it's going and why they're using it and how to do these kind of very thoughtful integrations. That's a key piece. And Ronnie, I'm sure higher ed struggles a little bit with like funding and keeping people because of that, right? You and me might be examples of just that. And I think that's one of the things that higher ed has a great mission, but oftentimes it struggles with funding that mission. And I think that's where a lot of that kind of plays in. And it's an important thing to factor in when you're dealing with. And one of the questions like we were preparing is, how do you suss out like what's going to be an issue with a WordPress site? I suss it out by, do I have people who are coming to me who care about it, who are like, this is a very important instance for our community and you better treat it well. Like this is our WordPress. And so like, I feel like that's, for me, a very good indicator that it's going to be a very successful instance because people care about it. So anyway, that would be my one kind of note, even beyond the infrastructure and everything I do. It's like, do they have folks on the ground who understand, care, and love it,
They need a champion.
Exactly.
Definitely need a champion, or more than one for it to be successful. You reminded me of I'll be brief, a funny story. of the infrastructure thing, though. We had a cluster with multiple clients on the cluster, and every day at 7 a.m., it would go down for weeks and weeks and weeks. 7 a.m., it's going down. We couldn't figure it out. It would come back up after like 5 minutes. It turns out multiple institutions had bought this same service that restarted the computers on every desktop in the university at 7 a.m. and turned them on, and they all opened up the website, their main website, at that time. So every computer on campus, on multiple campuses, was opening up their website within the exact same second, and like it would just crash. And we had to figure out, like,
How
can
do
we
you
stagger this please a little
troubleshoot
bit?
that, Ronnie? Like that's
It took a long time. We were about to lose customers that were mad. It's now funny, but it was not
I
funny
can
at the time.
imagine. I feel your pain.
Yeah, that's a wild one. Very good. All right. So as we come to an end here, I'll say to anybody at home, if you have any questions for myself, for Jim, for Ronnie, feel free to go to the website impressive.host and submit a question there. And then Jim and Ronnie, why don't you tell us where folks can follow you? What websites are important? If anybody wants to hire Reclaim Hosting, where do they go? If they want to learn more about Gravatar, where do they go? Jim, why don't you go first?
I'm sure you're not interested in me, but if you were, I have a blog at bavatuesdays.com. And then if you were interested in Reclaim Hosting, and I thank you, Jesse, for that plug, we're at reclaimhosting.com, and we really do focus on higher ed. That's kind of where we come from and what we do and what we know. So if you're interested and that's kind of your bag, come see us.
Awesome.
And I'm easy. I'm at gravatar.com/Ronnie, RONNIE. And actually, our mission is very similar with owning a space on the web that's just for you. And so that feels nice. It's we let you bring your own domain in too now, so that's kind of fun.
That's great. We're going to have to do a separate episode about Gravatar. And if anybody's interested at home, go check out Gravatar. It's a really amazing way to create a quick link in bio, but then also tie your social media, your avatar to services across the web so that you can sync those up and only have to update them in one place. Cool. All right. Well, thank you both for joining on another episode of Impressive Hosting. And yeah, we'll be back in a couple weeks. All right, that was a great conversation with Jim and Ronnie. We talked about higher education and the needs that those institutions have for managed WordPress hosting. A couple of takeaways from that conversation. First off, I loved Jim's thought process around a domain of one's own and the empowerment that gives to students, the ability that it gives them to carve out a little bit of the internet for themselves. And, what he specifically mentioned was the idea that they would have the ability to narrate their work. And I love that because when you're in an educational situation where you're trying to learn, being able to reflect on what it is that you're learning and to explain it to others, whether that's through like a verbal situation in a classroom or online where you're blogging or writing about your work. It's a great opportunity for self-expression. It's a great opportunity for you to learn the information even better. And as I said in that episode, when you teach, you end up learning the content a lot more. So that's something that really spoke to me. And I think it's core to the mission of open web and open source as a whole in general, the idea that everyone has the right to a part of the internet and to express themselves on it. The other thing that we kind of got into there was the seasonality of traffic influxes for higher education. I thought that was really interesting. I know that most of us think about Black Friday or other sales times as an opportunity for us to get ahead of possible complications with e-commerce websites. You want to talk to your clients about it. You want to get an understanding of how much traffic they're going to be getting and be ready to compensate for that. But, as someone who, even as a professor, I didn't always think about the idea that there was an influx of traffic because students were all signing up at the same time. That first week of the first semester, I would imagine, would be incredibly taxing on any kind of infrastructure, which actually leads us to the last takeaway, something that we didn't get to explore as much as I had hoped on the episode, but I think it's worth discussing is how you scale these types of setups. So, coming from WP Cloud, where we focus on real-time scaling, vertical scaling using pooled resources and the ability to allocate additional resources in real time, I think is really important for institutions in higher ed, especially since they need to be able to ramp up and provide resources in real time for students who are trying to get their lives going, trying to get into classes, trying to get everything going for themselves. And at those points, it can be quite stressful for them. So having to deal with infrastructural issues and problems with that's really complicated and a pain for those students. The other thing that is really interesting that I think is worth exploring more, and I think we'll do a follow-up episode in higher education, is around unpacking a multi-site. As we discovered with Jim, multi-site is still a really great opportunity for folks who are managing thousands of sites to take out a lot of the complications that go along with management of that large pool of websites. But at the same time, there are opportunities out there to increase performance, lock down security even more, and do that through a network of sites that aren't necessarily tied together like a multi-site. WP Cloud, for example, offers the ability for you to tie in the development flows into the updating of WordPress core and plugins and themes, so you can update thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of sites across your WP Cloud account simultaneously. The use of plugins allow for role management and SSOing of students and others to log in and manage their accounts across a network of sites. So I don't think that we necessarily need to think as multi-site as the only opportunity out there anymore to compensate for or to manage thousands of websites. Tools like WP Cloud allow for you to do that seamlessly. So it's something worth exploring and something we'll take on in the next episode. Thanks for listening.